It's hard to know whether to think of teenagers as big children or inexperienced adults. There's a big developmental difference between where you are as an adult and where a teenager is. You've already grown and developed into who you are, and a teenager hasn't even arrived yet. Teenagers, as we know them, are a relatively new idea. In fact, it wasn't until 1941 that people even used the word teenager. In the 1930s, the whole idea of a teenager didn't even exist. In fact, at that time, only 50% of teenagers were in school. The rest of them were already working. It's not the 1930s anymore. Things have changed. People who had something to sell created a whole culture around what it means to be a teenager. Movies, books, magazines, clothing, you name it. And unless you've been asleep, you know the rest of the story. It's like someone once said, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of adolescence." It's tough out there for a kid. I want to point out to you 4 areas where teenagers are experiencing big-time change: physically, socially, intellectually, and emotionally. You know, sometimes you just wish you could push a button and teenagers would listen to you and maybe even like you. But the reality is it takes time. Your job as a mentor is to be a constant presence and a model for them as they change and grow. Back in the 19th century, the average age for the onset of puberty was 17. Today, it's happening at an average age of 12, 5 years earlier. Nobody knows the reason for this shift, but it's becoming very difficult for teenagers to handle based on today's standards for physical appearance. The ante is up. The media bombards kids with thousands of images every day that become the standard for what it means to be normal, acceptable, likable, or even lovable. Kids today find it difficult to accept who they are in light of who they believe they should be. They think that a prerequisite for being loved and accepted is to look just like actors, supermodels, and sports stars, and it's painful when they don't. Teenagers are spending more and more time building friendships and making social connections with kids their age. In fact, a study done by the Horatio Alger Institute found that kids want to spend even more time with adults than they already do. So even though kids are craving friendships, the place of an adult, a mentor, is still vitally important. Let me tell you about something unique in the social life of a teenager. It's a concept that some people call indie-filiation. And basically what it means is that a teenager wants to stand out and be unique as long as they don't stand so far out that they open themselves up to ridicule. It's basically a tension between 2 different needs: the need to be unique and the need to fit in. It's like they want to be an individual as long as that's what their friends are doing. Intellectually, a teenager is just beginning to develop the ability to think like an adult, which can make for some pretty interesting conversations. Sometimes the best thing you can do is just bite your tongue and listen. It's not always about giving advice, but it's really more about thinking with them, to recognize your differences, but at the same time help them to think critically on their own. A teenager can recognize when they're being respected and listened to, and if they know you're willing to listen to them, they're going to be much more willing to listen to you. A 16-year-old girl once said, "I never want to go back to being an adolescent again. I just want this time in my life to be over." Think about it. Physical changes, relationship issues, divorce, blended families. It's like an emotional earthquake. It comes quick, but it can change a kid's life in a radical way. Bottom line is, when it comes to teenagers and their emotions, strange behavior is pretty normal. Let me give you 2 suggestions as a way that you can offer some stability. First, treat their emotions as important. What might seem small and insignificant to you could be huge in the life of a teenager. Whatever you do, don't minimize their emotions. Sometimes what a teenager needs is just one person who's willing to listen. Second, emphasize their positive qualities. A teenager's peer group can be absolutely brutal. They're quick to point out all the negative things, and they can make a kid really feel like dirt. That's where you have the opportunity to provide some balance, to encourage them about the things that they're interested in, they're good at, to tell them that you're proud of them, and to make them feel important. There's no universal adolescent experience, but even though times have changed, the feelings and the changes that kids go through are still the same. Think about when you were a teenager, the painful times, the joyful times, the embarrassing times, and just think about the difference it would have made to have a coach in your corner pulling for you, encouraging you, committed to your success. Would that have made a difference? Sure it would. That's the power of a mentor.